I first joined the temple. I joined the temple in the summer of 1969, and my high school friend, his name is Jimmy Feldman, he became a devotee first. We were both on a quest, you know, for the truth. We were both 17 years old. This was 1969, and I went up to Boston that summer to visit my sister. She was going to Boston University. And Jimmy stayed in New York, and he found the temple on 2nd Avenue. At that point, the temple moved from 26 2nd Avenue to 61 2nd Avenue, 2 blocks and across the avenue on the west side, you know, between 3rd and 4th Street. So he found the devotees first, and he told me about Krishna consciousness. And then I came down in midsummer, and I met with him, and he took me to the temple. And he joined, and he became initiated as Jamunacharya. And I wasn't even living in the temple yet when I first saw Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada came only for a few days from LA to New York, and he was only staying for 2 or 3 days. And there was nowhere, no facility for him at the 61 2nd Avenue temple. So my friend Jimmy's father, Joe Feldman, was a rich man, and they had a house out in Hewlett, Long Island, but he also kept an apartment in the Boart building on Tudor City Place, right across from the United Nations. And he gave that apartment for Prabhupada to stay at. So Srila Prabhupada stayed in Jimmy Feldman's father's apartment. So I was very familiar with the apartment. So I came to visit one day. I was there one day, and I saw Srila Prabhupada. And it was, I wasn't really sure what was happening. My head was still in the clouds. And it was very curious what happened that morning. Jimmy, everybody came together in the living room to have darshan with Srila Prabhupada. And I was with Jimmy, and he didn't want to come inside. Apparently, he was a new devotee. And that morning, he snuck out and smoked a cigarette. So he felt like he didn't deserve to be in the association. And everybody, it was his father's apartment that Srila Prabhupada was staying at. And he refused, he wanted to stay at the door, so I stood at the door with him. And he refused to come inside, and there was a whole ruckus. Finally, Prabhupada noticed, said, "What's going on? What is the difficulty?" And they said, "Oh, Jimmy, you know, doesn't want to come inside." Well, what? He feels that he's not worth. They started telling him, Prabhupada said, "Whatever you have done, I forgive you. Now come in and join us." So that was my first introduction to Prabhupada. But I only stayed for a few minutes, really.
So I finally made this connection with a very small temple of about 4 devotees in Baltimore. And I lived just 3 blocks away. So what I would do is I would wake up at 3:45 in the morning. And Baltimore was a little bit of a scary city at night. So I would run like a madman through the city of Baltimore to get to the temple. It was a little scary, but once I got there, I felt, great. It was wonderful. It was a very sweet group. Anyway, I heard a few weeks later that Prabhupada was coming to New York, to Henry Street. And they suddenly got that information that day. And so they said we had to drive all night to see Prabhupada during, Mangalarti. So we drove all night. I never really driven all night, but it was fun. It was great. We were excited, and I was excited to meet Prabhupada, and of course see another temple. I hadn't seen another temple, so I went to Henry Street, where Prabhupada was, and of course I had heard so much of Prabhupada. I heard so much of Prabhupada's voice on tapes, cassette tapes back then, and when Prabhupada came into the temple room, I mean, there was, it was a tremendous sort of, it's hard to describe. There was a kind of levity, to it. But while we were all kind of rising, we all went down when he came in. And I was struck at how short Prabhupada was, almost like a head shorter than me. And I'm not that tall. because Prabhupada always seemed so grand, larger than life, you know. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who said this. This is because Prabhupada carried with him so much. The guru means, you know, heavy. So the weight of the tradition, you could feel being carried by Prabhupada. This attracted me a lot because I was here to learn. After all, I was a college student. I was seeking knowledge about yoga. So here, when I saw Prabhupada, I saw, you know, here is a person the likes of whom I had never seen before, someone who carried with him the weight, the full weight of a tradition, powerful and beautiful tradition.
My first darshan I ever attended with Srila Prabhupada was in 1976. I had become the temple president in Miami, and I was only a 3-year devotee. And when I went to visit him, I didn't even know if I'd even get to see him or participate in a darshan, but I had a little book of photographs of what we were doing at that project. It was a pretty nifty project. We had ponds and swans and flower gardens. We were turning into a tropical paradise. And so Prabhupada was, when I got my chance to speak with him, which I didn't know was going to happen, it sort of took me by surprise. And Prabhupada opened the book, and very carefully, he was leafing through the book and looking at all the different pictures. And then he said to me, "So, you like to preach?" And I said, "Yes, Srila Prabhupada, I like preaching very much." And Prabhupada said, "So you develop this beautiful tropical paradise, and perhaps even others, and people will be attracted by the natural beauty of nature. And in that situation of being immersed in the beauty of Krishna's external energy, they will sort of open their hearts, and they become kind of vulnerable, if you will, or window opens." And he said, "This is the perfect opportunity to enlighten them about spirituality and begin their spiritual life, sort of plant that devotional seed." So we did that in Miami, and then in time I was asked to come to Hawaii and develop projects there. And we've developed a beautiful project, which is now incredibly successful. Tour buses are coming by just to see the property, even from the outside, what to speak of those who come in. And when people come in, I'm always seeing as they go, "Wow, looking at this beauty." And they're like out of the box. And then we take that opportunity to start telling them about what inspired, because they're always asked, "Why did you develop this beautiful place? How did this happen?" And I said, "Well, this is the instruction of my spiritual master, to develop this beautiful tropical paradise." And then tell people, really, what is the source of all this? Where did this beauty come from? And that's the opportunity to plant that seed and give them one of Srila Prabhupada's books and send them away and praying that their spiritual life will now begin.
Well, Brahmananda told me, gave me the account of what happened. Apparently, the day before the initiation, Brahmananda told Srila Prabhupada, well, let me digress a little. In November, early November, I'd go every day with Brahmananda to the office, which was on East 10th Street. It was an office that Brahmananda used, a couple of blocks from the 61 Second Avenue Temple. And I'd go and I'd type all his correspondences, and I took over at that point responsibilities that a devotee named Ray Rama had, because he had just left. And I was doing the BTG subscriptions and whatever mail orders would come in the mail for the old album that Alan Coleman produced, the Happening album, and the abridged Gita we had. We had a couple of pamphlets at the time, and of course, Srila Prabhupada's the original Bhagavatams that he brought from India. So there were a couple of things that we were advertising in the Back to Godheads, and the orders would come in. And so I was doing these services at the office. Now one day, I just decided to type. I had my typewriter. I typed a letter to Srila Prabhupada that I never intended to mail. I just wanted to say, "Dear Srila Prabhupada, I joined the New York Temple, and I'm so happy to be a disciple, and it's just so wonderful to be serving you in this mission." And I put the letter in my drawer, and I never thought about it. And I went back to the temple early that day, and Brahmananda apparently was looking for some carbon paper, looked in my desk and saw the letter, and he mailed it, unbeknownst to me. And I never even thought to look at it again. About a week later or 10 days later, and there was like a ritual there at 61 Second Avenue. Whenever a letter from Prabhupada came, we would all gather together when when the mail came. And so whoever got the letter would open it up and read it to everyone. So that day, Brahmananda said, I got a letter today from Srila Prabhupada, Borja, and Steve Prabhu got a letter. I said, how did Prabhupada write? Brahmananda said, that letter you wrote, I mailed it. I hope you don't mind. So Prabhupada wrote me a letter, my dear Stephen Hebel, So I had that communication. But so a month later, it was about a month later, it was when Prabhupada came to Boston. So Brahmananda tells me that the day before my initiation, he told Prabhupada that I was his secretary, and he wanted me to get initiated the next day. And and Brahmananda said, so I have in mind a name for him, because he's serving as my secretary. I thought Swarup Damodar, because Swarup Damodar was the secretary of Lord Chaitanya. So Prabhupada said, so he is Swarup Damodar, means you are Lord Chaitanya? And so then Prabhupada said, no, we'll just give him the name Swarup. It's easier to remember. Swarup Damodar is too long. And of course, a few years later, a scientist, godbrother from Manipur, he became Swarup Damodar. He wore the name well. And so I was initiated the next day. And in those days, Prabhupada didn't even sit on the Vyasasana. We sat in a circle, me, the other three initiates, and Srila Prabhupada. And he made the fire, and he did the chanting. And, after the lecture, it was a great lecture. Well, all Prabhupada's lectures are great. Very special lecture that afternoon. The famous phrase that sometimes people repeat this, that Prabhupada said, Krishna consciousness is simple for the simple, but it's hard for the crooked. He said it that day. So when he was handing me my beads, I reached out for them, and he repeated it. He said, so simple for the simple, difficult for the crooked. And then he handed me the beads, and he said, so your name is Swarup Das. And very often when I see Prabhupada in the course of the years, a couple of times he'd say, Swarup Das, I've given you a very nice name. And I'd say, yes, you have, Srila Prabhupada, I really like that. And he would quote verses with the word Swarup, Jiva Swarapaya Nitya Krishna Das, Swarapena Vyavastati, and go on quoting verses. Did that a few times when I'd see him.
But here's the thing, the morning classes were in some ways better than the morning walks, because the morning walks, the pathways were not big, so it kind of, I'd be in the third tier of humans behind Prabhupada, so I couldn't hear him so well, But the morning classes were wonderful. Now, I hate to say this, but the reason why the morning and evening classes were so intimate is because, frankly, most of the devotees got sick. Now, my wife at the time had volunteered to go into the kitchen. And she came back after a few hours in the kitchen and said, we cannot eat this, because the Bengali boys were stomping potatoes on the ground and little worms were going into the food. And of course, later Prabhupada found out about this, and he was very upset with the devotee in charge of this, because Prabhupada noticed there were so few devotees attending class. But of course, that delighted me, because I just felt like I was one of the only few there, But it wasn't like so few. I mean, there were a good like 30, 40, devotees, but that's still very small when you spread out and so on. So on the day of Gaura Purnima, I had an experience of really one of the greatest surges of inspiration in my life. Prabhupada, I'm pretty sure he quoted this verse from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Jayatam Surato Pangor, Mama Mandamadergati, Matsarasva Patambojo, Radha Madanamohano. And this so powerfully impacted me, that the lotus feet of Radha Madan Mohan are everything to me. Though I am lame and ill-advised and I'm senile, this is Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami speaking. Anyway, Prabhupada was speaking on this on the day of Gaura Purnima. I don't remember if it was the morning or the evening, but I was just transfixed. And of course, I was perfectly healthy because once I heard what was being cooked, all I did was drink Dobbs and eat the little bananas, the little tiny bananas. They're ridiculous. You had to eat about 4 to get an American banana, you know? So I was healthy and I heard everything. I was alert, unlike most of the devotees. So this was just amazing. It was just marvelous. But that day, I actually felt like leaving and going back to America. Now, why would I want to do that? I was healthy. I was with Prabhupada morning and evening, this holy man like I've never known anywhere. Because I felt so powerfully that Prabhupada has given so much in the books. Not all the books were even out. Back then, just a few volumes of the Bhagavata, but TLC with teachings of Lord Chaitanya were out, and the Krishna books and so on. But I had this great inspiration with Prabhupada's books suddenly, with the books of the Vaishnava tradition. I had a sense, I had a special relationship with the great sacred texts of the Vaishnava tradition from hearing Prabhupada speak on this verse. So I, in a peculiar sort of paradoxical way, I felt like leaving Prabhupada, but in a way gaining more of Prabhupada and the tradition that he brought to the world. Just from that morning, that class. In many ways, moved me into the work that I've been doing up to this very day. You know, getting my PhD from Harvard and publishing sacred texts. I feel like I'm celebrating that moment. This very moment.
My experiences with being up close and personal with Srila Prabhupada was a delicate balance to keep the awe and reverence, but be comfortable enough to interact with him. And sometimes people would lose that balance and maybe become too familiar, like some of his personal servants did. So I always felt, just amazing awe of his status, you know, of the Acharya. I mean, I considered, someone once said to me, could you imagine going back in time and walking and talking with Jesus Christ? This was someone that didn't know anything about it. I said, yeah, I've been there, done that. You know, I mean, I saw he was a pure devotee, and but Prabhupada, personally, when he would speak and talk, there was just so much love and compassion emanating from his eyes. It was, sometimes I'd look into his eyes, they're so deep, those big brown eyes. You know, I'd like lock into, and just everything about his graceful movements, and just Prabhupada just was embodied. 26 qualities of the book. Just, I always felt love and acceptance, but I always felt like very clumsy and awkward and stupid and foolish, you know. But at the same time, I just felt he was like my father, you know, and I was his son, and he just took me for everything, you know, accepted everything about me. So I always felt very comfortable, but always inept, incompetent, like, you know, like that one time I took his luggage into his room, and I started getting these flashbacks of Jerry Lewis and the bellboy. You know, I say, where do you want your luggage, bro? You want me to set up your dictaphone? Felt very foolish, but always felt Srila Prabhupada's compassion, sweetness.
When Srila Prabhupada was visiting us in Miami, and he was exiting the temple room, and as he was leaving the temple room, there's 2 exits. You could go out through the main exit, but Prabhupada decided to go out the side exit, which took him through the Tulsi room, where he had many Tulsi plants. At that time, I was a Tulsi Pujari, and I had built many pots, big wooden pots for Tulsi, and had set up ultraviolet lights. And Prabhupada walked through the Tulsi room. I was right with him, right by his side. And Prabhupada stopped, and he looked around at the Tulsis, and a beautiful smile came across his face, and he put his hands up in the air, and he said, "This is very nice." So, number one, it really invoked within my heart great appreciation of Prabhupada recognizing my service and being happy with my service. But even furthermore, it deepened my relationship with Tulsi Devi. And since that time and to this very day, I take great joy and great pride in serving Srimati Tulsi because she is the mother of devotion.
When recalling my close encounters of the personal and blissful kind with Srila Prabhupada, one stands out more than others, and I suppose it's due to the gravity, the seriousness of the situation. And I'm referring to when my sister Mamahini's husband, Sridham, met an untimely death December of 1973. And Mamahini spoke a little bit about this when telling her memories. So Srila Prabhupada found out what had happened, and he was in Los Angeles at the time, and we were living there. And about a week later, she and I went up to his quarters and spoke with him. She had questions about her situation. I mean, here she was 24, 25, I think she was widowed. She had a 2-year-old daughter. So she wanted to know different things, you know, her future. Could she ever get remarried? So we went together to speak with Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada that afternoon, he spoke on a wide range of subjects. It's pretty amazing, so many things he talked about. I wish there was a recorder running at the time, but there wasn't. So I've tried to keep in my memory intact what was discussed. And so at one point, especially what I want to tell about is, at one point, well, Sridham was Prabhupada's personal servant also, we should say that. So in LA, when the temple was on La Cienega some years back, so Prabhupada began to like eulogize, I guess you could say, and he began speaking about Sridham. And he said, so Sridham, he was a good boy, he was my servant, he was driving me, he was cooking for me, giving massage, like that. And he asked me, he wanted to get married. And I told him, you're young, better to wait. But he insisted, and I let him, and then he went crazy. And then Prabhupada paused, and then he started speaking more. He said, so we understand from Bhagavad Gita, Krishna gives assurance that one who makes progress on the path, spiritual life, if he falls down, Arjuna asked, you know, due to worldly mindedness, why? And so he'll have again the opportunity in the next life to pick up and continue his progress. And then Prabhupada stopped, and then he like, I could see he was almost choked up. Then he said, but he had the opportunity in this life, and now he has to take another birth. So what is the use? And when he said those words, what is the use? It like struck me like a thunderbolt. And it dawned on me that when Prabhupada saw us falling away and falling down and wasting this valuable opportunity, it was heartache. I mean, his mission was to deliver the whole world, what to speak of his beloved disciples. So when he saw that we weren't taking it seriously, because he saw the consequences, means we have to take another birth. And I realized then and there that he cared about us more than we care about ourselves. He, like a father with his sons, he doesn't want to see us suffer. And it hurt, it pained him that Sridham fell away, that any of us were not going to go back to Godhead and take this opportunity seriously. So many things were discussed, and you know, that day, like I say, but that particularly stands out in my mind. I wanted to tell that first.
During that 1974 Mayapur festival, like I mentioned earlier, it was a small group. Wasn't that many. Bhagavatam class, morning and evening, morning and evening. So Prabhupada was giving a class in the morning, I remember. And I remember he was going on for some time. Prabhupada's classes were generally not that long. He was going on for a while. And the deities, the altar was it? Oh, it was not open. The curtains were not open. But I decided to take my camera down to the other end of the temple room and take a shot of the whole event, you know, the Vyasasana and the devotees there and the beautiful, you know, you could see out the greenery from the different sides of the building. And suddenly Prabhupada stopped class, and I think the curtains opened, and all the devotees got up, and Prabhupada was coming right toward me, and I was right there, and I kept, and I'm not a photographer, but I sort of became one. And you know, photographers tend to be obnoxious. I mean, they get in the way, they kind of move around. they disrupt the reality of the situation a lot. Well, I sort of did that. And that's just not like me, you know? So, you know, I mean, Vishaka or Yadav, they're better at doing that kind. They have that obnoxious sort of photographic talent. Whereas I just had my little camera and I kept shooting, and Prabhupada was coming right toward me, but he was looking at Radha Madhava. And I was so sort of stunned by being within the vision, the visual range of Krishna to Prabhupada and Prabhupada to Krishna. I was sort of in the middle, and I was experiencing something of the sort that I've never really experienced, something really, truly ecstatic. And then Prabhupada came right up to me. I was in the way, as I mentioned, but between the railing and where Prabhupada, he's supposed to be at the railing. I was at the railing and not quite knowing what to do, and Prabhupada's just still looking at the deity. And then he got down to offer obeisance. And so I did, and our shoulders were touching. I didn't know whether this was inappropriate or whatever, but all I could tell you is I was thrilled offering, you know, obeisance with Prabhupada, you know, in unison. Really a thrilling moment. The whole thing was thrilling. I know that the other devotees were wondering, why are you there? You know, who are you? Should you even exist? How dare you get in the way of this extraordinary embodiment of the Vaishnava tradition? During that time when Prabhupada was walking up to Radha Madhava and sort of being within this sort of how do we say in photography, depth of field, you know, I like that term, depth of field. I felt the depth to some degree. I felt the depth. And so much of yoga, as I had been studying all those years, was about being purely transfixed and attentive to the object of meditation on the outside, but internalizing it completely on the inside and being totally absorbed in it everywhere. That's what I felt when Prabhupada was walking up to the deities. I had a taste of samadhi. Not deserving of it, but I snuck into a little bit of samadhi there.
In 1976, the summer, the very first New York City Rath Yatra in New York, and Prabhupada was there, and we rented a Lincoln Continental, a fancy Lincoln Town Car, dark blue, black Landau top, and I drove Prabhupada from West 55th Street Temple to the parade. So the whole idea, the parade had begun going down Fifth Avenue, and so the idea was to pull up in front of Subhadra's cart, Srila Prabhupada would get out of the car, climb up on the cart, and ride the rest of the way. So in the car, on the way there, who was in the car with me? Let me think. Brahmananda, Tamal, and Kirtananda. Tamal was in the passenger seat. Prabhupada, Brahmananda, and Kirtananda were in the back. So Srila Prabhupada asked, so what's the schedule? What's the plan for today? And Kirtananda says, Srila Prabhupada, the parade's going to end at Washington Square Park, and there'll be a large crowd of people there, and we're going to have prasadam distribution, and there's tents, and there's booths, and there'll be a stage, a platform for you to speak, to give a talk, and have kirtan. And I was adjusting my rearview mirror and looking, and Tamal was, you know, nudging me and giving me a dirty look. So keep your eyes on the road. So Prabhupada, you know, was pleased, and he was quiet for a moment. And then Prabhupada began talking about, he said, oh, in the beginning I would go to Tompkins Square Park by myself and chant and speak, and often the police would come and harass me. They would tell me to stop or move, said I was disturbing the peace or obstructing the pathways, like that. They would, you know, often force me to to stop. And so Brahmananda said, well, Srila Prabhupada, today at Washington Square Park, the police will be there, but they'll be there to make sure no one disturbs us, because we have the park all day long, you know, and it's ours. And then I think it was Kirtananda said, Srila Prabhupada, I think it's safe to say today you've conquered New York. And then I chimed in and I said, and Prabhupada, when you conquered New York, you conquered the world. And Prabhupada laughed and he said, yes, that was my thinking from the very beginning, to start my mission in New York, the most important city in the world. And you know, every time I hear that song, New York, New York, you know, if you can make it there, you'll make it anywhere. I think of that discussion in the car going to the Rath Yatra.
At the very first festival that we had in Mayapur in 1974, I was a very young devotee. I'd only been a devotee for 1 year. And Srila Prabhupada was walking from greeting the deities down the aisle of devotees back to his Vyasasana. And I saw devotees. I was kind of looking down the aisle. Everybody was touching his feet as he went by. So as he got closer and closer and closer, it was like my turn. And I reached out. I closed my eyes and I grabbed his feet. And I could feel it was just like velvet. It was they're the softest, most wonderful feeling. My hands were just like melting, like his feet were like melting like butter. It was just so sweet. And then all of a sudden it crossed my mind, wait a minute, I'm holding his feet. I'm stopping Prabhupada from moving. And then my heart started going real fast. I pulled my hands back and I kind of looked up sheepishly and I saw Prabhupada just was smiling at me, just like the moon was smiling. It was just such an expression of love. And I guess I understood from that Srila Prabhupada recognized what a neophyte, how I just didn't really know what I was doing and didn't mean any harm. But to encourage me, he gave me such a smile of love, and that really deepened my relationship with him.
And one morning, oh, it was hot, it was August, it was Vrindavan, it was so hot. And on one morning walk, the flies, the Vrindavan flies were just intense that morning, and the sun was coming up, it was over 100 degrees already, and they were dive bombing me, and I couldn't, finally I said, like exasperated, I said, Prabhupada, are there flies in the spiritual world? And Prabhupada said, yes, but they're not bothersome like these flies. And when they buzz, they're chanting Hare Krishna. So on that note.
I went on a morning walk with Prabhupada. Now, in Dallas, the devotees there had an idea to take Prabhupada to a park, particularly beautiful park. So this would require getting in cars. We didn't just walk out of the temple complex and move along into a park, but we had to get into cars. So Prabhupada was in the first car with devotees. There was a second car, and there was a third car that I squeezed into. And it was dark out. It must have been in the winter or in that vicinity. And we got to the park, and we pulled into the parking lot, and we got out, and then you had to kind of walk a little bit in to the paths of the park. But there was a gate that was closed and said park closed, open at sunrise and closed at sunset. The devotees who arranged for this were like, my gosh, how are we going to deal with this? And Prabhupada said, no problem. We'll walk up and down on the parking lot. So Prabhupada was so, appreciative and loving toward the devotees that he hardly wanted to make them feel badly for, frankly, not checking it out thoroughly enough. If you're going to take all that time and trouble to get in cars and go to a place, it's good to know whether it's open or not. But, back then there wasn't the internet where you could just check park times, and everything is accessible. You know, where do you call? What do you do? So obviously, no one had checked it out. So there we were, you know, about 20, 25 of us walking up and down a parking lot that would have a little bit of an incline. No one was in the parking lot except for our cars because everyone else was smart enough to know that the park was not open. So we would walk up and down. We would go up the incline, and then Prabhupada would turn around, and we'd follow him back down. This would go on for, 20, 30, 40 minutes. I don't know how long. And Prabhupada would be chanting, and we'd stop and talk sometimes. But the thing about the parking lot is, you heard Prabhupada's cane, because the parking lot was gravelly. So you could hear, that's pretty much all you could hear, plus Prabhupada's voice, or the devotees, doing their japa when Prabhupada was not talking. But the event that really stuck out, in my mind, is how a jogger was coming in the opposite direction. A man, I remember, he was wearing all white, shorts, whites, and he was jogging, and the jogger, who was going slowly, said, "Good morning," looking at Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, "Good morning to you," something like that. And I remember looking at the devotees who were surprised that Prabhupada didn't say, something like Hare Krishna or, some kind of more sacred greeting of some kind. But what this reminded me of is how Prabhupada was a perfect gentleman. And that was how Prabhupada defined a devotee in that famous news interview down in Gainesville. How can you tell a devotee when you see a devotee? Prabhupada said, you will know by the fact that he is a perfect gentleman. And I'm assuming that he also meant a perfect lady as well. So that was a nice meditation.
So every afternoon, I somehow fell into a pattern, thanks to Palika, my god sister, where she would come out with the garland, the morning garland from the deities, hand it to me and tell me, go give it to Srila Prabhupada. So I'd go into the room where Prabhupada was giving darshan to the local Brijvasis, people that obviously he knew, his old friends from town when he lived at the Radha Damodar temple. And I'm not sure who his godbrothers, Gaudiya's godbrothers. I didn't, recognize anyone. Some were like just town dignitaries, just friends. And like I say, most of the talking was in Bengali or some in Hindi, and then probably, but it's, he would interact with them, and of course they were all so respectful. He had the higher seat. He had, they all gave him like due deference. They were all sitting there, so they were joking, but you could tell they had the highest respect for Srila Prabhupada. And it was like he was holding court. So there was an equalness, simultaneously, equal but not equal. And sometimes Srila Prabhupada, they'd laugh and joke. And I could tell, even though I couldn't understand the Hindi or the Bengali, I could tell when they were like just reminiscing and joking. And then Prabhupada would get serious and say some verse in Sanskrit from the Gita that I recognized. But it was a very different kind of situation than with the disciples, because the guru-disciple relationship is a very, how would you say, also the age difference. We used to call Prabhupada, say he's our spiritual father. He was more the age of our grandparents. There were two generations. In fact, Srila Prabhupada was born the exact same day as my maternal grandfather, Abe, September 1st, 1896. So, the age difference and just, so there was a big difference in the atmosphere, him talking with those old pals, of his. And there's just a lot of love in those exchanges, and they were Krishna, these are Brijvasis, they're what a birth to take, and they were all very scholarly and very gentlemanly. I felt like I was on another planet, people are so low class in the West. Just leches and rough and violent, and they were just all, namaste. and these were Brijvasis and intimate associates and friends of Srila Prabhupada before he came to America. So it was a very nice opportunity for me to see Srila Prabhupada in that very flowing environment with these people who were his age, his peers. That was nice.
When I was in a darshan with Srila Prabhupada in Potomac, Maryland, 1976, when I was showing Srila Prabhupada pictures from our book and showing him our temple, Prabhupada asked me an unusual question I never expected him to ask. He said, "How many rooms are in the temple?" And very foolishly, without thinking, I'd have no idea where it came. I just blurted out, 13 rooms, Srila Prabhupada. And I said it very authoritatively. It must be the cheating propensity. But I just said that. Prabhupada nodded. And when I went back to the temple, I actually went through with a little notebook and I was noting down how many rooms there were. The rooms you didn't think of, a laundry room, the bedroom, the closets, that, the other. And it ended up, there was exactly 13 rooms. So I suppose my realization was that that number 13 came from Super Soul. But the spiritual master and Super Soul, they're really, in a sense, one and the same. Jive sakshat nahi taite guru chaita rupe, shiksha guru hoy Krishna mahanta sarupe. So because we can't see Super Soul within, he comes without as the guru. So as a team, Prabhupada asked the question, and then the guru within inside, Super Soul, told me how many rooms it was, and everything turned out fine. But it was just a great realization how in touch Prabhupada is with Super Soul and how they work as a team.
So when I went up the steps to the room he was staying at with his suitcases, I thought that there were people still in the room. So I knocked on the door and opened, but everyone was out of the room, and Srila Prabhupada was sitting there by himself. And it was very bare. The room was bare, and it just had this, Prabhupada was sitting on a pillow on the floor, and there was a table, and he was resting his head like this in his hands, resting his head on the table. And the walls were bare except for right across the room there was a small picture of baby Krishna, butter thief, Makanchur, Krishna's. And Prabhupada was like staring, gazing at that picture. And I realized that when I walked in, he was like in samadhi. He was just fixed and I realized, and I walked in with this large suit trunk, and I felt very stupid, and like I was saying, like Jerry Lewis in The Bellboy. And I said, Srila Prabhupada, I have your luggage from the airport, and I have your steamer trunk. Where should I put it? And he motioned gracefully on the far wall, and I put it down. It was very heavy. And I said, Srila Prabhupada, do you want me to open it? Do you want me to set up your dictating equipment? And he said, no, it's late. I'm tired. I'll start tomorrow. Get some rest. And I said, do you want me to get you anything? Can I get you anything? I wanted to do whatever service. And then it hit me. I realized that I had walked in the room and I had not offered obeisances. I was so busy with the thinking. And then, so like a dummy, I went, oops, I'm so sorry. And I went, Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna. Prabhupada wouldn't let me finish. As I'm going to Namo Vishnu, he went, thank you very much. Get up. So I didn't get up. I sat up on my knees, right in front of Srila Prabhupada. And I realized, and then again he said, Swarup Das, I've given you a very nice name. And I said, yes, thank you, Srila Prabhupada, as usual. But I also want to thank you for the letter you wrote me last month. I had just gotten married. And when I got married, I sent Srila Prabhupada a Dakshina, $50, and Conk and I bought 2 sweaters for him. And he wrote me back a very nice letter saying, so now you are married in Krishna consciousness. That is very nice. But marriage can be risky business because too much affection for one's wife, one can forget Krishna. But if both husband and wife remember Krishna, household life becomes like Kunta. Then he said you should, one of the great householders in our lines, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and he said in the letter he wrote, such a great householder he was, and such nice children he produced. One of them was my Guru Maharaj. He said, so follow in his example. So when I saw him the next month in that setting in Boston, I said, Srila Prabhupada, in that letter, you said I should follow in the footsteps of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Are you telling me I should have as many children as him? I wanted to make Prabhupada laugh, you know. And Prabhupada laughed and said, no, in this age, having a wife and one child or two children is enough responsibility. I said, okay, I'll try to keep it to two. And it was a very, very nice exchange like that. And I said, Prabhupada, you must be tired from the flight. And I'll say goodnight. You know, it was just that more than ever, I think. That exchange that night really, I mean, I was like choked up with tears, you know. I tell people sometimes that, you know, we learn from the scriptures that we're 1/10,000 of the tip of the hair, the size of the atomic. But, you know, somehow I puffed myself up into 180 pounds of clumsy stupidity, oafishness, you know. And that's how I felt with. But then he made me feel 1/10,000 at the tip of the. I floated out of that room as if, you know, on a cloud, light as air. And that's how Prabhupada made me feel. I think that's how Srila Prabhupada made us all feel. So that was a very nice interaction with him.
Back in 1974, back at that first Mayapur festival, the first time when devotees from all around the world came to Mayapur, and the journey was divided up into 2-week portions. First 2 weeks in Mayapur, and then we would all go to Vrindavan, which also was a temple in progress. I mean, the temple, Krishna Balaram temple was simply, when you went there, it was simply columns rising into the sky of bricks, you know, bricks and mortar. And but Prabhupada's quarters in the back were finished. So Prabhupada would stay there. We stayed a bit of about like a 5-10 minute walk down toward the center of Vrindavan in a place called Fogel Ashram on the same side of the street, but about 5-10 minute walk down. So we would all settle there. And it was an ashram that had a kind of atrium open to the sky. And we all, you know, were sleeping everywhere and so on. And I don't know, to this day, I can't even remember how it all worked. Because, you know, I don't even remember where you showered or where you went to the bathroom or anything like that. All the practicals, it's inconceivable to me. That many people in this little ashram, anyway, how it worked, I have no idea. But every morning, Prabhupada would give class. And then they set up an asana, again, fairly high, in that atrium area, that open area. And it was beautiful. You know, the weather was beautiful and very temperate. And we were under the stars, you know. Prabhupada was giving class. And every morning I would hear Prabhupada. Again, most of the devotees were sick, so it was myself, and at that point, even more devotees were getting sick. And it was only like 15 of us, sort of semicircular around the asana. And well spaced, there's plenty of room. And if you got too close, you couldn't see Prabhupada as well. So you had to be a little spread out. So I was a good, you know, 15, 20 feet from where Prabhupada was sitting. And there was only one person between me and Prabhupada, sort of in my line of vision. And so the class was going on. I remember it was just amazing just to sit there. And I was well. I didn't get sick. And Prabhupada was looking over toward me. And then he looked over toward Brahmananda and said to Brahman, he said, Brahmananda, what is he doing? Pointing, well, pointing at me. So I thought, I mean, who else could he be pointing? He was literally looking at me, pointing at me. Brahmananda was asked, what is he doing? And Brahmananda looked over. I thought at me. And again, it was dark, so it was a little hard to see how everyone was exactly looking at things. But Brahmananda reported back to Prabhupada when he looked over, said, Prabhupada, he is sleeping. Prabhupada said, go over there to him and tell him to go out, to leave. So Brahmananda, big Brahmananda, is walking over toward me. And I'm like wondering, was I asleep? I'm well, I'm rested. I'm like one of the only people in the whole group that actually can stay awake during class because I did not get sick. And here's Brahmananda coming over to me. While I thought I was listening to Prabhupada's class the whole time, I actually thought there was something wrong with me. And Brahmananda is coming over, he's coming over to me, and then suddenly stops at the person in front of me. Now, I didn't know that he was falling asleep. So suddenly, such great relief came over me that I was not the one to be told to leave. But then again, as I was reflecting a little later, I said, you know, that was a wake-up call. So maybe I wasn't sleep, but maybe I was still asleep in a certain way. I figured that was also meant for me. Wake up, Garuda. Wake up. Hear carefully. Pursue the process of Shravanam very, very carefully. Don't take it for granted, just like it's the first step, and then we can move on to the other 8 steps. No. Shravanam. It's all about Shravanam, hearing.
Yeah, during that week in December '69 when I got initiated. So they were cooking halva in the Boston Temple every morning for the devotees. And oatmeal. Okay, so it was the oatmeal that got screwed up one morning, and somebody thought it was sugar, and they were putting salt instead. So when Prabhupada found out about it, he said, yes, a little bit of salt in that preparation is good. But just like in our practicing Krishna consciousness, a little bit of sense gratification to make it palatable, too much and the whole preparation is ruined. Same thing with the salt, little bit to make, too much and the whole thing is ruined. So he compared it to, you know, enjoy, we're allowed to enjoy devotional service, but too much, no, whole preparation is ruined. Learning lessons.
I often hear devotees saying that, geez, I hope I'm going to make it. I'm not sure if I'm going to go back to Godhead in this lifetime. I often ask the question, well, do you chant 16 rounds? Yes. Do you follow the principles? Yes. Are you doing some service? Yes. Are you staying in association with devotees? Well, I always remember back one time when Srila Prabhupada came to the temple in Maryland, and I had the honor of being there. And at the end of the class, I don't remember everything Prabhupada talked about, but he concluded, as he does so often, he said, simply chant your rounds, follow the 4 regular principles, and at the end of this life, you'll go back home, back to Godhead. I remember that so clearly in my mind. I can literally see Prabhupada right now, and those words just coming out of his lotus mouth. And I always share that with devotees, that we can take Prabhupada at his word. Prabhupada wasn't exaggerating. Prabhupada wasn't bluffing. If we simply follow his basic instructions, Prabhupada told us we're going to go back to home, back to Godhead at the end of this life. So if we do that, it's a simple process. If we simply follow his instructions, then we can be assured, because Prabhupada told us so, that we'll attain all perfection and go back to the lotus feet of Krishna.
Srila Prabhupada once, I remember seeing him get into a car to go on a morning walk. And it was somebody that was visiting the temple. They loaned the car. Prabhupada got in, just like a drill sergeant, you know, do a white, with his hand. He took his hand on the dashboard and wiped it, and there was dust. He said, everything should be cleansed. Everything belongs to Krishna. And you talk about a learning lesson, you know, everything should be cleansed. It should be cleansed. Everything belongs to Krishna.
In Philadelphia in 1975, what was it, 76? Anyway, somewhere in there, Prabhupada came for Rath Yatra. And it was wonderful. I mean, Prabhupada had many morning walks. I sat in Prabhupada's room for hours, right on the edge of his desk, I mean, just a few feet away. And again, I never asked Prabhupada anything. We interacted with eyes, but, you know, I was more observing Prabhupada and the visitors that would come in or be brought in, or the devotees who would come from afar, you know, that kind of thing. It was wonderful. But when Prabhupada first came to Philadelphia, he was interviewed at the airport, the Philadelphia airport. And he was being interviewed by a female reporter with whom Prabhupada had many exchanges back and forth, and he was being questioned about women's participation. And Prabhupada was in his own way, and I was not there at the airport, but I remember being told what had transpired. And apparently the female reporter was left somewhat distraught, dissatisfied with what Prabhupada was saying, and that he appeared to favor men over women, or at least the philosophy did, or something of that nature. When Prabhupada arrived, he first immediately came into the temple to offer respects to the deity. Then he sat on the asana. Now, I was there for that. And I was sitting right within just a few feet of Prabhupada in the asana. And Prabhupada was reflecting back on this interview, and you could tell he wasn't happy with it. And this is my perception, he seemed to feel a little sorry for the way it ended up. And he then wanted to set the record straight. He said, male or female, everyone on the transcendental platform is equal. There is no higher or lower. Oh, he said everyone on the dancing platform. That's what he said. I always thought that was sort of cute, if I may say so, because, you know, in the Western world we have dancing platforms, I think. I don't know because I never danced until I became a devotee. That was the only reason to dance. Before that, there was no reason to dance. So he said on the dancing platform, everyone is equal. Yeah. I admired how Prabhupada felt like he had to sort of recapitulate and reconsider and reflect and maybe redo in some sense. He seemed concerned. Yeah, I liked that. He was thoughtful, deeply thoughtful. I liked that a lot.
Srila Prabhupada captured our hearts, you know. He captured us. It was like iron filings to a magnet, you know. And it was a hard sell. I mean, the message about Krishna consciousness, we were like, you know, hippies, hedonists. And here's Prabhupada's introducing, you know, everything was about growing long hair. He wanted us to shave our head. Everything was about peace and love. He's introducing the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna's telling Arjuna to get out there and kill. Yeah, it was completely the antithesis of what we were about. You know, we were so infected with impersonalism. Didn't matter though. We just, you know, whatever Prabhupada was giving, we were buying. Because, you know, we were sold on. I mean, I think many of us, when we joined, we really didn't even know what we were getting into. I think we thought, you know, we had so much impersonalism. And this I would like to, whether you want to film this or not, you know, I did a lot of typesetting right after my initiation, when we went back to New York, Srila Prabhupada, ISKCON Press was coming together, you know, the machinery, the people in Boston. And Prabhupada told Brahmananda to go up to Boston and take charge of ISKCON Press. And I'll never forget this, at Nishta Gosti in New York. Brahmananda had always been in New York, always the president of New York. There was no such thing as New York ISKCON without Brahmananda. I mean, before the GBC, before committees, there was Prabhupada and Brahmananda. You know, Brahmananda ran everything. And I was Brahmananda's right-hand man. So I had a bird's eye view of everything, what was going on in ISKCON. So Brahmananda held the Nishta Gosti and said, I'm leaving New York, I'm going to Boston. And Prabhupada wants me to go to Boston. Everyone started crying and gnashing their, and Brahmananda said, and Swarup's coming with me. Because I was his secretary. Also, there was a holdup in the typesetting, in the composing machine, you know, as far as knocking out the Krishna book. Prabhupada wanted that Krishna book printed. And it was supposed to be ready by February. So when I got up there, Rundity was typesetting, but she was pregnant. Palika was typesetting, and Jayadutta, but Jayadutta started doing other things. I was doing double shifts. I was 16 hours a day I was working on mostly Krishna book, but Nectar of Devotion, Srimad Bhagavatam. But Krishna book, it was the first time we were introduced to these pastimes. And I remember thinking to myself, because one of the first things I ever read was Prabhupada's Srimad Bhagavatam that he brought over. And in the preface, I think it was, or introduction, I remember very specifically reading that one should not go to the 10th canto before reading the first 9 cantos, because they're intimate pastimes, and one should not jump to this 10th canto. And here, Prabhupada is one of the very first books he's trying to, but I realized that in his infinite wisdom, he needed to get Krishna book out there to make everyone understand that God is a person. Like we didn't, except for little stories Prabhupada would tell in his lectures, we didn't know anything about these pastimes, the rasa dance, and Krishna with Mother Jasoda, and the demon killing. And so as I was typing these chapters, one by one, because the tapes would come, Srila Prabhupada would send the tapes, and the tapes would be transcribed, and then they would be edited, then they'd come to the composing. So I'd get them next. So I was very on the rung, one of the first rungs on. So every day people say, so Swarup, what's going on with Krishna these days, And when the Krishna book was printed, so many devotees, so many people became devotees reading that book. And I realized that we were all impersonalists. Basically, someone once asked me that was new, they just joined the temple, I think it was 1970, they said, sure, Prabhupada keeps on ranting about these, who are these Mayavadis, who are these impersonalists? It's us. It's us, we were all into the white light, the merging, even when we were months or years into being devotees. We were infected by voidism and impersonalism. And then Prabhupada gave us that mantra, Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani, to deliver the Western countries from the disease of impersonalism. And the Krishna book was the weapon. God is a person. He has a personality. What did Prabhupada say once? We can give you his name and address and phone number and name of his parents. So I realized that, like, what strategy? I mean, it was a war. Prabhupada was, he declared war on Maya. And that was, he was conducting the war, and that was a great strategy to get very first book, Krishna book, on the streets. And like I say, the end of 1970, those 3 things that came together, the printing of Krishna book, the release of the London Radha Krishna album, and the My Sweet Lord on the radio, suddenly everybody wanted to know about Krishna consciousness. Then we started appearing in movies, We became iconic. Part of the street scene, Sankirtan.
So in 1975, Prabhupada came to Dallas, Texas, to the temple there on Gurley Street, I think. And back then, the temple room doesn't look anything like it looks now. When Tamal Krishna Goswami took over, I mean, he made it into truly a Vaikuntha atmosphere. Back then, it was what it was, a gym. And the only thing that didn't make it, that told you it was no longer a gym, is that at one end there was an altar. And on the other end, there was a Vyasasana for Prabhupada. It was rather high, too. A little too high in some ways. It seemed awkwardly high. But the rest was very, the rest of the building, the rest of that room was, it felt like a temple within a gym, a gymnasium. So it was kind of weird. But when Prabhupada came, I remember one evening, Prabhupada gave a class, and the class was very short, and Prabhupada just started chanting the Maha Mantra. And it broke out into kirtan, which didn't usually happen after a class. And this temple room, of course, was rather long. It was a gymnasium. So it's appropriate for running around. Well, in fact, that's what ended up happening. The devotees were so moved by Prabhupada's chanting that they would run down toward Prabhupada, and then they would run all the way across down to the deities, and back and forth it would go. And I was not in the marathon group of runners. I was observing this, and I was just looking at Prabhupada, chanting the Maha Mantra, and realized that everything is there. I knew I didn't fully appreciate it, maybe not even very much partially appreciate it at the time, but I could tell there was so much more there for me to gain. And what I learned from that was that I could look forward to extraordinary journeys into the Maha Mantra. And indeed, that has happened.
One morning walk, people walking in Gandharva said, Srila Prabhupada, has there ever been a time or an incident where a soul is existing and then no more existing? Like it's just like snuffed out of existence? Has there ever been, is there even a possibility for that to happen? And Srila Prabhupada stopped. And I remember the look on Karanda's face. Like, one day I'm going to print a book called Stupid Questions, Perfect Answers. Anyway, so Srila Prabhupada looked at him and said, you asking that question, have you read my books? Have you read anything? Have you read Bhagavad Gita? What does it say in Bhagavad Gita? What does it say? And everybody was quiet. And I had just memorized that verse the day before, and it went, Nitrayate Mriyate Vakadachin, Nayam Bhutva Bhavita Vanabuya, Ajonitya Shashvato Yam Purano, Nahanyate Hanyamane, Sadiyate. Prabhupada said, yes. Say again. That mean, what is that? And I started saying the English, and then Prabhupada stopped, and he said, yes. For the soul there's never birth or death. Once having been, is always, never cease to be. There's the answer. So yeah, I got, that was my big moment in the sun to impress Srila Prabhupada. I was on many walks because I had my own car too, and I was an earlier devotee. I didn't have to ask around his permission. If I wanted to go, I went. But I would always stay in the back. But okay, I want to tell this story. You got me on recording? Before BBT moved into the Higuera Street facility, we had this old brick building on Washington Boulevard where, and Srila Prabhupada was in LA, and we gave him a tour of that facility, the offices and the warehouse. And at one point, we came up to the mail order department. So Srila Prabhupada had some questions asking about how many subscriptions, how many letters. So, I came up to the front there and I started answering his questions. And and then at some point, Tamal said, and Srila Prabhupada, all the letters, Swarup answers all the letters. Anybody that writes, he's answering the letters, and many people are joining. We're getting devotees from his letters. And Prabhupada said, yes, one who has Swarup has liberation. So anyway, a few days before that, someone suggested to me, Swarup, why don't you make up a form letter? So when people just write for information, you just send them the form letter with a catalog. And it didn't sit right with me, form letter. No, doesn't, So Prabhupada answered my question. During that discussion, that tour of the warehouse, he just turned to me and said, when I worked for Dr. Bose, one of my duties was to handle the letters, the inquiries. So even if the slightest inquiry would come in, I would answer personally and continue to correspond until they became a customer. There it was, in living color, my answer. So there's no form letters coming from me. Everybody got a personal letter. I also type 106 words a minute. So no form. So it was like, he was like a mind reader. I mean, that was bothering me, that question. We had the photocopy machine, just knock out, dear, whatever, thank you for your interest, enclosed is. Nah. You know, just now, I stopped at the temple. I got here early and I stopped at the temple. And all of a sudden I see across the street Jagadish. He was one of my mail order people. I said, Johnny Gunn from Coon Rapids, Minnesota, Rottenabusana. Mark Selzer, 1805 Assumption Drive, Bismarck, North Dakota. Him and his brother, Wayne and Mark Selzer. You know, they were like, just reeling them in. See, I worked on commission. Security commission. But my credit cards are maxed. I squandered all my credit. What a shame.
So to share this realization, you have to bear with me for a moment, a little sort of preface. When I was a young man, 15 years old, one morning a police officer knocked on our door and he came in and informed us that my father had died untimely in an accident at our summer home, and there was an explosion, and one moment he was there, one moment he was gone. Well, my family, everyone was devastated and everyone was crying and crying, but for some reason I didn't cry. And days went by, I think it was about 3 or 4 days until the funeral. I never cried, but everyone was coming, was crying and crying. I never cried. As we were leaving the funeral and driving in the limousine, all of a sudden the tears just flowed like rivers out of my eyes. So I knew, and I had that realization, that understanding. In 1977, when Srila Prabhupada left us, I was a temple president. Had only been a president for just a few years, maybe 1 year. And when we got notice that Srila Prabhupada had left us, I called all the devotees into the temple room and had a kirtan, and devotees were all crying and crying. But I wasn't crying. For some reason, tears never came. I thought, well, okay, it's going to come. Because I knew when I was a child the experience of my father leaving. And this is really my real father. Prabhupada's like the ultimate father. I knew it was going to come. So days went by and days went by, and I was waiting. It never came. Years went by. Decades went by. And I'm wondering, why no tears? So my conclusion is probably two things going on. One is just my lack of love for Srila Prabhupada as a neophyte. But perhaps, and I hope this is true, and I'm sort of thinking this in my heart, is that unlike my father, my material father, Prabhupada never left us. And as I chant my japa in the morning, as I struggle to follow very strictly the principles, as I'm always speaking, I'm feeling that Prabhupada is always with me. There's not a moment in my life I don't feel Prabhupada's presence. So that was my realization, is that Prabhupada never ever left, and he's always with us, and that's wonderful.
Krishna bowl was fashioned in the model of a college bowl. It was called the college bowl, which was a quiz show, game show back in the 60s. And the 4 people from one university would go up against another 4, and questions would be asked, and you'd hit the buzzer. And so it was a contest. It was an intellectual, academic exercise, and it was a competition. So they made Krishna Bowl in the image of College Bowl. And the same thing, these little boards were designed with buzzers, and a moderator would make up questions, all based on the content of the Krishna book, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, chapter by chapter. And questions were asked, and teams were gotten together. So it began in Dallas, and it started spreading to other temples. Denver, Los Angeles, they were doing it in San Francisco. It was fun. After the morning program, at least that's the way we did it in LA, after the morning program, we had about 4 teams of 4 people. And there'd be a match. It would last about an hour. It was all, I think there was a time limit. A question was asked, and if you hit the buzzer and got the right answer, you get a point. If you hit the buzzer and got the wrong answer, you'd lose a point, and the other team would have a chance to answer the question. So you couldn't be too fast on that buzzer. You better know your stuff. So this was going on for months. And then it was decided that at the Rath Yatra in San Francisco in 1974, that there'd be an all-star matchup between the All-Stars of Dallas and the All-Star team of Los Angeles. And so that took place at the Valencia Street Temple in San Francisco. Shortly after that, Srila Prabhupada was told about it because it was spreading to all these outpost temples everywhere. And when Srila Prabhupada was told specifically about Dallas, that the children were taking part in this, and he said, no, this is not good. The children should not be burdened with this kind of thing. It should not be part of the curriculum. It's not necessary. It's unnecessary. So, I mean, it's well known that Srila Prabhupada nipped the Krishna bowl. You know, that's the scuttlebutt. Prabhupada didn't like it. It's not that he didn't like it. He just said it was unnecessary. It's something that's just not needed. We don't, you know, and the children should just learn Krishna consciousness in the basic ways. You know, just teach them Krishna consciousness, let them read the scriptures, but this Krishna bowl is not necessary. So, yeah, it was eventually it was stopped. And, you know, Srila Prabhupada knew our tendency to get carried away with things. Srila Prabhupada, is it okay if we exercise? Yes, Prabhupada even said, good exercise, go up and down steps. Or, you know, next thing you know, devotees are joining gymnasiums, you know, and working out with, and taking martial arts. We were young, we get carried away. And the same thing with astrology. And just recently, I had a discussion with someone, because I put on my Facebook page quotes from Srila Prabhupada where he was giving advice, no, actually giving an order. Do not go to astrologers. He said, Vaishnavas have no business, devotees have no business going to astrologers. You know, we depend on Krishna. And so somebody made a comment saying that, no, astrology is very important and it's not, and it's not bogus. I said, no, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying it's unbona fide. It's very bona fide. It's very, you know, it's mentioned in the scriptures. Bhaktisiddhanta was an astronomer and an astrologer of the highest caliber. But Srila Prabhupada knew our tendency, you know, to get caught up in something and get distracted from the focus of Krishna consciousness. So, you know, this was a younger person out of Hawaii. Apparently his father was an astrologer, and he just took it personally. But what do they call that, straw man argument? You know, saying, it is too bona fide. I said, never said it wasn't bona fide. But look at the quote. You know, I'm not saying, Srila Prabhupada is saying. Srila Prabhupada would do that often too. Like he would say, quote that verse out of the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says, Namam Diskriti no Mudha, those who don't surrender to me are rascals. One time, and he said, one who's not a devotee can have no good qualities. I remember an Indian man said, Swamiji, how can you say that? Very harsh judgment. Prabhupada said, I'm not saying, Krishna's saying. I'm just repeating Krishna. So the same thing, I was just quoting something about astrology. So sometimes, you know, things are taken wrong. You know, you could look at the Veda base and find contradictions in different instructions, orders, a million contradictions. But you have to have the common sense to balance everything and understand Desha Kala Artha, the time and place and circumstance of everything. And sometimes devotees, well, I don't want to criticize, but yeah, get a lot of nuts on Facebook. It's more like in your face book. I found it's a good preaching tool, though.
I think the most powerful attribute that Prabhupada, you know, that impacted me from Prabhupada, I think was the very palpable sense that here was the embodiment of the parampara that had come together in Prabhupada that would impact the world, but that more specifically would empower me. And unexpectedly, I felt, you know, this power coming into me. Not in a way, I was not one of these devotees who would like to imitate Prabhupada, his mannerisms, his language. No. But rather, he empowered me to be me. Not to be him. Prabhupada is Prabhupada. That position is taken permanently. But that he infused within me the sense that I have a little tiny role here. And he could empower that. And it was about finding my own devotional voice, my own teaching voice. He just, and I have a very different personality than Prabhupada. I'm not bold like Prabhupada was, you know. I'm not maybe as in some ways, you know, Prabhupada could shock people with sometimes what he says. That's really not my personality to shock, you know. But that doesn't matter. He infused in me the power to be more me in relation to Radha and Krishna. I think that's Guru. That's Guru. That's really Guru.
I heard this story that that first wave of devotees that went over to India, Srila Prabhupada asked someone to clean out his room at Radha Damodar, straighten it out, you know, and put things. And they said, in just cleaning, there was a little piece of paper in the corner of the room, and Srila Prabhupada's handwriting, it was like notes, like things to do, like a to-do list, and on top it said, "Save the world from godlessness." So it's like we make lists, you know, do the laundry, buy the fruit, save the world from godlessness. So he was preparing to come to, you know, the U.S. at Radha Damodar temple. Yeah, and came to New York. You know, it's funny. You know that story, Razor's Edge, and Somerset Maugham wrote the book, and there was two versions of it. I think even Bill Murray. Anyway, it was about the story about after World War I, the soldier goes to India to find the truth, and also that story of that person, I forget, he was Austrian. He wrote that book. Oh damn! He became a disciple of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's. Anyway, the whole idea of having to go to India and trekking into the Himalayan mountains and finding a guru, you know, and I realized, you know, at 17 years old, when I was on my little quest for the absolute truth, you know, all I had to do was take a bus and a subway for 35 minutes, and there it was waiting for me at 2nd Avenue in the East Village. You know, in other words, Prabhupada was presented to us on a silver platter. He came to our doorstep. We didn't have to go to India. Most of us couldn't even find India on a map before we met, you know, Srila Prabhupada, now big scholars.
Everyone in this world, materially, wants something from us. Even the mother, who is described as the closest reflection of true love in this world, even my mother, who loves me like crazy, wants something back. But when I met Srila Prabhupada, it was so clear all he wanted to do was give, simply to give. And all the infinite qualities that Srila Prabhupada manifests, his compassion, his love, his understanding, I couldn't pick a single quality to say that stands out in my mind, because they're all manifest somehow. And I feel so incredibly blessed and fortunate that somehow Mahaprabhu came and Srila Prabhupada became part of that mission and came to the Western world, got on that Jaladuta and bared everything that he had to do to come here in his mission. And somehow I was dragged to his lotus feet, and I'm forever grateful.
Srila Prabhupada's genuine humility was just so apparent. I mean, in the letters that he wrote, in the way he interacted with people. I mean, he could be like a lion, but, you know, he was genuinely humble. He genuinely considered himself, like all the things we read in the scripture, he was, you know, felt himself, he was prideless. He had no care for fame or... My grandson, one time, he was 12 years old, I took him to the Rath Yatra Festival in San Francisco. And on the way home, he said, you know, Grandpa, all the other spiritual organizations, they're known for the guru. Like Guru this, Yogi that, Baba, you know, Yogi Bhajan, Guru Maharaji, Rajneesh. But with the Hare Krishnas, nobody even knows who Prabhupada is. It's the Hare Krishna movement. And Prabhupada's like in the background. I said, well, Keval, you just understood the very essence of who Srila Prabhupada is. Srila Prabhupada, you know, gives all credit to his guru, and he's presenting Krishna, not himself. And that's why we all attracted to him. He's actually devoid of all sense of false prestige. And it's not, you know, we say these words, but he's the real McCoy, the real deal. I mean, his humility is just, you know, when you see him walking like this, you know, I mean, I've seen people do that in very phony ways too. And I could put on a good act too. But you know, Prabhupada's not acting. It's real. You know, so that's the main thing that just his humility. He's genuinely humble and prideless. Beauty, that's the beauty, absolute beauty, the pure devotee of Srila Prabhupada. And one other, you know, Prabhupada was never at a loss for words. He was never on the defense, you know. He's always had an answer for everything. You couldn't trip him up about anything. So I was always very proud to be his disciple. Brilliant, his brilliance. So quick. Who could give classes like that every day? I saw the Pope once reading from cards, you know. Prabhupada just would sit down, give a perfect class. Perfect. Speaking. You know, it had a beginning, had a middle, had an end. He would tell stories and then bring it back to the point, you know, in the verse. And it would always never be too long, it would never be too short. Day after day after day after day. Perfect. I mean, you could tell he was empowered. That's the other thing. I know you asked for one, but I mean, it was obvious that he was a Sakyadesh avatar. He was especially empowered by Lord Nityananda. There was just nothing ordinary about him. He was extraordinary. No, even that's offensive. He was beyond extraordinary. He's a transcendental personality. Don't get me started with Srila Prabhupada. He's everything. He's our life, you know. I mean, I don't know Krishna. I don't know who Radha and Krishna are. Yeah. But I know Prabhupada, you know. And that's where my faith is. He knows Radha and Krishna. Someone asked me once, do you know God? I said, no, but I know someone who knows him really well.